So please welcome to Savannah, Dr. Margaret Rose Vendryes.
Oh my goodness. Savannah, you are lovely. Thank you all for coming out. Thank you, Harry, for talking about somebody I don't feel like I know anymore. Thank you, Stephanie, for making really good accommodations for me. Thank you, Tim, for trying to get my PowerPoint to work properly, and I am going to share with you as much as I can. There were little technological glitches, but I think I can float through them for you. I hope you will spend some time in that exhibition upstairs. There's some very special things and things you should get up close and personal with. This particular image is one of my favorites, and I've started other talks that I've done with it just because of that idea of black being considered a color, and how many times over the history of artists who have written about themselves and about the arts that they make, mentioning this idea that black really is a color, and so is white. And if you mix them together, you have this gray area, which is kind of where I'm going to float around with you today. But the Harlem Renaissance is sort of the pivot point of the exhibition upstairs, even though there are several pieces that are made well after the Renaissance was considered to have closed, and that is around 1929 with the crash of the stock market. And when it opened, which has been sort of when World War I ended in 1918. So it's about a 10-year renaissance. And I've always questioned this idea of, well, how can you have a rebirth if you haven't been born yet? In terms of, a flowering, this was a moment where the creative energies of African Americans became known. And most of that happened because of exhibition opportunities, new patrons, philanthropic efforts that brought the fact that there were artists among the African Americans here who were making things that were visual and that were beautiful and that were marketable as well. The marketable piece has always been a boogaboo, as they say, a very difficult thing to do. Who wants to buy this stuff? Who wants to live with this stuff? But one of my colleagues, Mary Schmidt-Campbell, who was at one time the director of the Studio Museum in Harlem, she actually wrote down this statement. She said, disappointingly, the legacy of the Harlem Renaissance has been cultural separatism that to this day persistently lingers in the history of American art. And that was written in 1987. I started doing research on African American art in 1982, and that statement still holds true, that the separatism within the art world continues, and the expectations that are made upon artists who happen to be of African descent still continue to fall deeply into the rut of race. That's how I see it. And even though I am a historian, a degreed historian, I see these works and I see these people who make them as my comrades, and I see the work as an artist before I see it as a historian, almost always. For a long time I suppressed that because I had to write, the dissertation, all that, take the exams, learn the languages, all that kind of stuff. But this show is really, it is not the first show that has centered the visual around music, around sound. There have been other exhibitions. Beyond the Blues is the one that Harry just mentioned, and there have been several books written about how jazz music in particular has been instrumental in the advancing of the arts, especially here in the United States. As a matter of fact, if you do any any kind of research on Jackson Pollock, if you've ever seen any film of him working, there is always a background of jazz music. That somehow jazz, its improvisational turns, its layering, its sense of breathing and newness every time you hear it, even though much of it actually is written down. That it's the abstracting work that has come out in the modern world has been attached to the beauty and the excitement of jazz music. So what we've done here with the visual blues isn't really new. And I'm going to show you some of the pieces that are in it and some things to support it and some works that I have found that belong in this show and perhaps weren't available for it. Jay Robinson in particular has done quite a bit of drawings and paintings around the performance of jazz. Most of the work that you're looking at in this show is also very figurative. There's a movement going on now amongst art historians and thinkers and theorists that write about art and write about African American ideas are now talking about what they're calling ornamental blackness. This notion that there is a blackness that doesn't really breathe, that doesn't really have any particular personality, it just has a look. And I think that that is something that has always existed without that label, that there is a look, there's an expectation for a particular feeling, a particular treatment of the African American form, of representations of the African American experience. And artists have continually tried to find a way to make that come forward using their own voice, perhaps even using their own experience. But when I saw this piece, the first thing I thought was, where's Billie Holiday? Who is that little schoolgirl in that white blouse? What has happened to that seductress that we usually see on the stage, that kind of has that raspy voice, who always appears to be high and probably was? And here she is looking almost virginal in her blue and white. And is that necessary? Do we not want to also, through our visual arts, preserve the reality of where that creativity came from, what that creativity looked like, and also the damage that was done to that talented human being, to that woman who really was quite a beauty as well, and how we look to her for a part of what that world was like, through her words, through her sound, very distinctive sound. But I wanted to show you some images that I'm familiar with about stereotyping, and how stereotyping of people of color, especially Africans and people of African descent, where this stereotyping has come from and what it means. So this is just an old 1929, it's from the National Geographic, it was an advertisement in National Geographic, using the idea of the talking African drum as a way of saying that their radio had the clarity and the reliability of something that was a natural product. And that, too, is an up and a downside to what it meant to be understood as a black person, that you were naturally closer to what it meant to be human, which could be a good thing. But on the flip side, that sense that you have never reached civilization, that you are cannibalistic, that you're savage, that you're illiterate, that you can't be trusted, that you never know what's going to happen, that you are other, that you are different. These kinds of subtle uses of those messages, that this could appear to be, oh, it's a fine radio because it's like an African drum. It's covert in many ways, that sort of subliminal advertisement that we have learned about. The connection of African Americans to music, and these are covers for sheet music, and sheet music written by white composers. So, but the fun, that hard and fast stereotype of the kind black retainer who happily raised white children, and the comedic buffoon, that's sort of uneducated, ignorant, the downright funny African American, that African person. And it's fun and it's laughed at, but in retrospect, we see that it has reduced the efforts of these black people to a comic routine. So these are the kinds of things that I sort of picked up over time with my writing, with my reading, with my obsession with what happened to the Africans after they got here. So what I'm showing you here is a display, a Congolese objects display in the Exposition Universelle in Brussels, and in that date. And during my research around this time, when African art first became known outside of Africa, it was considered an ethnographic curiosity. They were, objects that were looked at as, natural history objects. There was no idea whatsoever that any of that could ever be considered art. And I have a quote here from a Harvard historian and here he goes. His name is James Schuler, and he wrote this in 1882. He said, "The innate patience, docility, and childlike simplicity of the Negro was, in short, a black servile race, a representative of a black servile race, sensuous, stupid, brutish, obedient to the whip, eternal children in imagination." There's no way I wasn't going to quote that. It was one of those things that you kind of stumble on, you go, I should have that memorized. But that sense, that idea around, it's almost a fear of difference, a fear of otherness. By 1914, this isn't even a generation later, African art, this is the Stieglitz Gallery on Fifth Avenue in New York. This was the first exhibition of art as art. African art as art, pristine, put on pedestals, background properly, separated from each other, looked at as art. Because before this time, European artists began to collect African art and to see a way to a new identification of the forms of the body, ways to abbreviate and to enliven their work coming out of African art. Picasso being the most blatant of them all, who not until 1933 did he actually ever fess up that that's what he was looking at. Because let's face it, who would care, right? Anonymous artists that he's stealing from. None of these things are signed. None of them have names. Now, there's a dark side to the coin of having all of this work all of a sudden become collectible and given a certain level of importance and some prestige. But the dark side is that a lot of this work was being scooped up and brought out of Africa with no identification where they came from, why they were made, how they were used, what was their purpose of being. There is more African art outside of the continent than in. It's one of those sad stories that I can't really, spend too much time with, but this is the kind of art, this is the attitude towards art that Alain Locke was trying to get African American artists to consider. He came up with this idea that there was a legacy at hand that was being taken advantage of, that those Americans who had African descent, who were art makers, needed to pause and rethink their attitudes towards Africa, to rethink those stereotypes that they did not create. and to embrace that work in a way that will bring them to the fore and to the surface as these European artists had been brought over time. Alain Locke was alone in his voice in doing this. He was adamant that there was a loss that could be regained through the arts, and not simply through business, through industry, that kind of thing. But the starving artist was starving even more if they were black. And so to embrace this idea and, you know, put down what you're doing and think a different way about Africa was not something that was going to happen very easily for the artists around him. Luckily, and Alain Locke, and there's a wonderful Van Vechten photograph of him in the gallery. Alain Locke was a Rhodes Scholar. He's the first African-American Rhodes Scholar. He's a doctorate in philosophy from Harvard University. He could not teach white people. Luckily for us, we got him at Howard. And he became the professor and the mentor for many a generation of African-American students after him. But with all those credentials, he was still considered inappropriate to teach at a place like the place that degreed him. So he made it his business to go out there and be the godfather for many artists, many writers, Langston Hughes, Richmond Barthé, to get them together with people who did have money and who did have means. He also was the one who began to push for exhibitions, for how do we get to see what is being made in those basements and in those back rooms. You know, most of these artists did not have studios, as many of us can boast today. So it was these kinds of champions that were necessary in order for those sort of things to go forward. But the negative stereotyping was a very large, large rock to roll up the hill. And Alain Locke was one of those little, short, light-skinned people who just got under your skin until you said yes. One of the artists who paid attention to him was Aaron Douglas. And there's several Aaron Douglas pieces in the show upstairs. But Opportunity Magazine, which is the Urban League's magazine, has social events, et cetera, political stories, et cetera. The covers were often given over to African-American artists, and this is Aaron Douglas's work. This was his understanding of what Locke was trying to say. Just make stuff that looks African, which means that it's just going to look decorative. It was going to be an Art Deco kind of Africanist message. And this is Palmer Hayden, who took it in the other direction. Yes, African art, we'll show African art, but we're still going to make those pictures look like representations and very European trended, but we'll put an African piece in it. A lot of what Locke was trying to say about understanding the language of African art was like going over their heads, but at least he was finding some sympathy, some empathy in the idea, and some efforts were being made. It was still, this is Meta Warwick Fuller, one of the few women artists, and interestingly enough, there were a number of women artists, Augusta Savage, who were sculptors. And sculpture is a much more, not necessarily difficult medium, but a much more expensive medium to work in. This piece is almost life-size. And what Meta Warwick Fuller has given us here is this kind of feminist statement in a culture, and this is a female mummy, where the lives of men and this focus on the new Negro. The old Negro was complacent. The new Negro was supposed to be kick-ass. You know, you weren't gonna take any prisoners. You know, that kind of thing. The new Negro was assertive. The new Negro felt good about themselves and their talents, that kind of thing. But still, there is that, it's still wrapped. If you look at this piece, she's not walking anywhere. She may be starting to unwrap on the top. The mind is starting to open up, but the mobility has still got issues here. And, of course, it is very representational as well. And it is very much hinged on a particular kind of Africa, Egypt's Africa, the civilization Africa, not the sub-Saharan world where a lot of the amazing carvings were coming from that the Europeans were collecting. So I'm showing you here the frontispiece for a very small little pamphlet for the very first African-American exhibition in a museum, which took place at the Art Institute of Chicago in 1927. The pamphlet was designed by Charles Dawson, who's an African-American illustrator, and it was just for a week. And the very first time that African art was shown with African-American in a museum. And as you can see, it's an exhibition of primitive African sculpture and then modern paintings, all by African Americans as well. If you look very closely, you will see that Egypt is writ large as the civilized, the beautiful, and of course Tutankhamun's tomb had just been opened in 1922. So 5 years before this exhibition, there was a lot of excitement around that. There was Egyptomania going on. Women were dressing like Egyptians, you know, piling on their bangles, all that kind of thing. And it took a little bit to remind people that Egypt actually is in Africa, right? Elizabeth Taylor notwithstanding, it is connected. There are no bridges needed. So that idea that, okay, we do have an Africa that is sophisticated, and you know, the white people, they're good about it. They're good about, so let's just show ourselves as Egyptians. If you look in the corner down there, in the very bottom by the piano, of course, all the black people have their tuxedos on. They are playing violin. We've got a songstress tucked in there. There's a piano player. Everyone is sophisticated. Everyone's upper brow. And that little Fang Bieri figure, that is a reliquary guardian. Those are very rare and very important objects. I didn't give you the disclosure. I collect African art, and I teach African art. So I'm obsessed with that too. So I know how powerful this figure is. If you read this image, you'll see that really it's not Tutankhamun that's watching over what is happening and what is creating progress and what is making these kinds of things happen. It's the little Bieri figure from the Congo that's doing it. You know, that little dark profile in the corner. Anyway, that is one of my favorite designs there. It says a lot more, I think, than anyone expected it to. So, the banjo. You know, the banjo came from Africa. And it's one of the few instruments that actually, fairly soon, it was kept intact that it was a West African musical instrument. And it was understood that it was a beautiful object that could do all kinds of amazing things, and a string object at that. So the banjo became a very black object. And this is one of the more scary, but there are many of them. So this one kind of is writs large, this idea of, you know, an animal playing a musical instrument. Again, playing fun, shoes with holes in it, that kind of thing. Sort of scary, but not so scary because he can play that instrument. You know, this is a musician, but this is a musician who is not there to amuse his own kind, and he is not playing for his own amusement. And actually, he looks more afraid of us than we should be of him. And then there's the banjo of someone like Henry Osawa Tanner. And Tanner left the United States. He worked with Thomas Eakins at the Philadelphia Academy, an amazing painter, very impressionistic brushstrokes, very expressionist use of color. And what he has done here is created a very tender image of the passing down of a skill from one generation to the next. Tanner made only 2 paintings that referenced Black life. He moved to Paris shortly after he had a very difficult time with his fellow students at the Philadelphia Academy, and he never came back. Part of the reason why he never came back was because he really wanted to paint religious subjects. That was what really made him happy. And some of the best work that he ever did were religious subjects, where Mary looks very Jewish, and so does Jesus, that kind of thing. And he became sort of an oracle in Paris. And those African-American artists who could get over there would go on a pilgrimage to visit Tanner. And Tanner would say to them, whatever you do, don't be a Negro artist. If you can help it, just be an artist. Figure it out. Figure out how to do it, because you'll never be able to find your own voice, because you're already being told what a Negro artist is. Wisdom. But then you come home and the expectations are still there. And the idea around the man who plays the strings comes out again from one artist to the next. It's Doc Thrash. These 2 pieces are upstairs on the walls as well. And then Of Mules and Men is Zora Neale Hurston's amazing book, where she went throughout the country chronicling what African-American writers were doing, what kinds of songs, folk tales, that kind of thing. Very, very important work that she did. And there you see the guitar man as being a very important part. And I wanted to play John Jackson's Steamboat Whistle Blues, and I think I have the video, so I'm going to take it up. But I want to read one of the lines from it that made me really laugh. And the lines go like this: I got stuck in the ice on Christmas Eve, and I froze my ass, it's true, just a shivering and a shaking down south case of them steamboat whistle blues. And when I heard it, there's a video of him actually playing it, and I'll tell you, you can't understand a word he's saying. You cannot understand a word he's saying. But you know, whatever it is he's saying is wisdom. Is wisdom, because there's no way a man could live that long and have a face like that and not have something really smart to say.
Play one more there. There's across the river, I'm ready to look fine. Lord, across the river, I'm...
Okay, well, you get the feeling. Now, if that's innate and natural, I'll take it. You know, this is someone who is in his music. He is inside his music. So when we see those ornamental black figures that are drawn by many African American artists, playing their instruments, playing their music, it's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful thing. So that flip side, that thing that we keep saying, you know, what are we going to do now? How are we going to get rid of all of those stereotypes? Maybe there's something there. There's something there that we should be allowed to keep. That we should be allowed to say, now this is what happens to me because of all of these techie issues. But I am going to find where we were because I know this talk. So we're somewhere in there. Where are we? Come, come, come. There you go. So we're back to our mules. And the music man, the guitar player, continues to be an icon amongst African American musicians. They continue to be iconic to those artists. This is Huey Lee Smith on the bottom, and that's Archibald J. Motley on the top, his jazz singers. This is called Blue Guitar. The black musician persists. It's an image that speaks to us. But the language has changed. It's changed from the minstrel on top, that's 1934, to the blue guitar on the bottom, 1998, a figure that is much more pensive, kind of disconnected from the inanimate signs that are around him, the fun and the frolic that frame him. So that he is playing a blue guitar. He's living a life that perhaps has some of those lyrics that are very resonant to him. But, you know, now when I think of a guitar player, I think of Jimi Hendrix. You know, I think of Crazy Mad, you know, that kind of thing. But the guitar has a history in the representations of African American men in particular. I'm showing you a Kara Walker here. This is from 1997. Much less subtle than what Huey Lee was doing there. But, and she is not very kind to her viewers. Kara Walker's work is damning, frightening, and seductive. It's life-size silhouettes, as you can see. I show you an installation view of one of her plantation renditions of life as it resonates for her. She makes up these fictions again. This is a very young woman. She was one of the youngest, 27. She became a MacArthur Genius. She won the MacArthur Genius Award. She's heavily collected. She has done really well for herself. And there's a lot of African American artists who wish she would stop doing that. Just stop, Kara. You know, because explaining these things is just too hurtful. It's just too hurtful. And you know, we were okay at the beginning, but she's still making them. She still has more to say. She is reminding us that the legacy of slavery lives underneath our skin as a nation, and it can, yes, still explain a lot of what happens in our life today. So I can appreciate what she does very much, and she has some very harrowing musicians in there. One that is terribly impaled to hark what is coming next in life. And the horn players. I'm going to take you to the horn players now. I'm going to take you back to something a little lighter. Except, though, the story is actually a little bit dark as well. This is William H. Johnson, and we have several pieces by William H. Johnson upstairs, except not these two. He learned how to paint in Denmark. As a matter of fact, he married a Danish woman. And he was very much into expressionistic landscape. He came back to the United States to find out that, oh no, that's just a little too derivative. And we really can't appreciate how black you are through those landscapes. So why don't you figure out how to, pony up and become a part of what's going on. This is in the 1940s. Now I'm talking about 1941 for the piece on the bottom. One of these jitterbug sort of abstracted forms, very full of music. He was very good at it. He's been referred to as a faux naive artist. In other words, he made it up. He made up looking like he didn't know how to do anything else. He made up a folk idiom for himself, and he did a very good job at it, and he was successful. These sold. The ones on top didn't. The expectations are still there. But he found a way to make it work for him, to find his voice inside of a folk-like idiom. I'm not going to have a whole heck of a lot of time left here. So, and there was more music to share with you, but I just wanted to come into the horn a little, how the horn player, the Coltranes of the world are some of the sexiest musicians that ever were, that they could make those horns talk. And that artists like Romare Bearden made great efforts to try and make it visual. How do you make a sexy horn look like a sexy horn when you put it on the surface? For Bearden, it was using colors and spirals, that kind of thing. I don't know, you can judge for yourself whether or not that's successful. This is Stephen Prince. This is a print that he did in 2001. It's called Intercessors Song. And just a reminder that black music is relevant to all rites of passage, that we have found a way to incorporate music into everything that happens to us. And so we have, I don't know if any of you have ever been to a jazz funeral. Rockin', I want one. I do. But there's the horn, And Aaron Douglas, the piece is upstairs, Judgment Day. Is that not what is being harked by that horn, to call down that you're ready on Judgment Day? And the dance, of course, this is Richmond Barthé. The jitterbug, and we're going to have jitterbugs outside. I hope you're all ready. I wore my shoes. And the jitterbug pretty much became this craze because of the gymnastics that African American dancers would go through, throwing themselves into the air. What Richmond Barthé did with his rug cutters, that's a 1930 piece that he did there. He made it very, very sober. I mean, that woman is trying to plow her way through that man. I don't know about you, but it don't look like he's going to be able to throw her anywhere. But dance became a very important, this is not fair because this piece is not this big. Take a very good look, because when you see it, it's like this. And what it really does look like in the real form is like they are dancing across the scales. Lovely, limber, almost cartoonish, but not. The color is lovely, and the back of the black woman dancing tends to be one of those topics that shows up again and again. Here you have the famous Jo Baker. And we see a lot of her back and her front. But in drawings, etc., that was a way that you could sort of be sexual without being sexual, is to show the woman from the back. And so you have that swing time there, the Charles Saley on the top. You have this woman from the back. She is engulfed in her music. She's probably at some kind of juke joint. She's slumming in some kind of way. And on the bottom is a lost, and I'm showing it to you just in case anybody here in Savannah has seen it. It's lost to us. this piece by Richmond Barté called The Breakaway. And he did not do any more like this. It really was an effort to try and use sculpture to show the flow of that dance. And it ended up looking very much like a caricature. So he did not continue in that frame at all. I show you Isabel Washington here because she was born here in Savannah. And she moved during the Great Migration to Harlem and became one of the dancing girls at the Cotton Club and became a songstress for some time. She was actually married for a short time to the Reverend Adam Clayton Powell. And, you know, you can imagine why, because she is really gorgeous. And that Misery, that piece which is up there without the page, it was actually used as, that's an Aaron Douglas drawing, it was used to illustrate a Langston Hughes poem called Misery. And it is, the whole poem is about the blues, and it's about loss. Usually it's loss of love, loss of money, loss of home, loss of family. Most of the time, singing the blues has that dark underbelly. Very rarely is the blues upbeat. There's a reason, I mean, it really gives the color blue a bad rap, though. I mean, really, I get lifted up by wearing blue. There was a music track here, but I'm going to let it go, a piano piece with Louise Williams singing. But you folks can, all of this stuff is Googleable. Not this talk, but a lot of this music can be found if you just throw. So Louise Johnson, All Night Long Blues was in there. I talked a little bit this morning about how Hale Woodruff was able to use this lithographic form in order to create a vibration, a sound in his lines, and how he was also able to make the black lines more prominent than the white lines, which is not that easy to do. So that he has these forms dancing, he has them moving, and he has the back of a woman up there, yes, finding her way, returning home after a long day at work, and climbing up stairs that you can hear the sound as she's going up them. Very talented artist. But I tell you, I have to share some of the other things that black women's bodies have been able to do that I am really, really, really surprised about. Who would have thunk it, this is 1994, that the effectiveness of the black body could act as a consumer seductress so that you would buy European fine lingerie, right? Because of this lovely woman on a camel. Yeah, these are the ones that I scratch my head at and bring to talks so that you folks can maybe help me figure out what the heck happened here. Because we are, I mean, I get it because we're beautiful. Black women are just amazing. We are, all of us. But to sell lingerie on the back of a camel, I just couldn't leave it out. Sorry. So can't do a talk like this about the Harlem Renaissance without talking about Jo Baker, even though she jumped ship and stayed in Paris. I forgive her. Because she would have never been able to pull off what she did with that banana skirt if she had stayed here in the United States. So there actually is on YouTube an absolutely fabulous, really good piece of her dancing in that thing. And I tell you, I know you're not going to Google it. So I want you to see it here. All right, there she is. You saw it here first. See, now you can tell people that you have actually seen it. She's done it. She's amazing, really. And I never, ever don't get that kind of reaction from showing that. So that banana skirt dance and Josephine Baker, her fame, her audacity. I mean, come on, she had a leopard for a pet. I mean, I want to be her when I grow up. You know, she married, and then she married again, and then she married again. You know, you gotta love her. Anyway, and she put her money to good work. She adopted all those kids, grown kids. That's hard. I have 2 kids, and they're not kids anymore, and they're still hard. So yeah, that she used her beauty, her talent, her gumption, and she seduced the French in ways that she could not seduce the Americans. Right? And it's because she was a stereotype that she owned. She owned it. And so then we had folks who followed her. Do you know who this is? Felicia Rashad. You didn't know she wanted to be Josephine, just like me. And then, of course, it didn't die with her. This is from the 1970s. Beyonce. Yeah, I know, I didn't make the concert either. But the resonance of that kind of self-reliance, I mean, Josephine was like this big. And when she came to the United States to perform, she insisted that she have a mixed audience, and that if it was segregated, she would not perform. And she did that through the 50s and the 60s, when at the height of the civil rights struggle, and she got her way. And she got her way. So I had to give her her due. The survey graphic, 1925, this is what gave us this idea of Harlem being the place, and the Harlem being a place of rebirth, of a culture that was still hazy and still really not fully understood. And the Strivers. This is a Van Vechten photograph, and there's several Van Vechten photographs in the exhibition. But this is one of those photographs that I've had issues with all my career. It is just simply known as Couple Wearing Raccoon Coats with Cadillac, taken on West 125th Street, Harlem, New York City in 1932. That's the title. There is no way that this is a wealthy African-American couple, which is how it has been written about. Van der Zee is known for having a closet full of gumptious things for people to put on so that they can look like they're rich, so that they can aspire to it. Sort of like making a shrine to yourself, to your future. This is cool. We all do it, right? If these were rich African Americans, we darn well would know their names. There's no way these would be anonymous. This is not ornamental blackness right here. That's somebody else's car and somebody else's coat. But it's a beautiful rendition of what it means to be striving, and a sense of wanting and desiring the wealth that you see around you. And there's nothing wrong with that. Winold Rice, I wanted to share with him, this is an Austrian illustrator who was the mentor and teacher of Aaron Douglas. And so you can see through Aaron Douglas's work where that was coming from. That broken down, fragmented, abbreviated, very graphic style. It's 7:02, you guys. You're supposed to be watching Lindy Hoppers. Okay? I didn't even get to my own work, but I'm going to go through the slides so you can see. This is Jacob Lawrence. This is Palmer Hayden. This is called Midsummer Night in Harlem. This is Hanging Out the Dirty Laundry. People hated this painting. Come on, they look like a bunch of buffoons. This is Michael Ray Charles and his Forever Free, Hello, I'm Your New Neighbor. right? 1997. And this is Beyond the Blues by Sam Middleton, a graphic artist and an abstract artist who was very successful in giving you the sound of blues through watercolor and through fragmented collaging and line. Very, very amazing and very little known African-American abstract artist. This is the beginning of my work. This is Donna Summer. This is the beginning of the African Diva project that I have been working on now for 8 years. They are 39 strong in terms of paintings. I've been fortunate enough to have opportunities to show them to people. This is Donna Summers. The back of that album is this image of Donna Summer acting like making fun of, maybe parroting, Marilyn Monroe. Of course. And there's one little piece of music, and I want you to listen to it, and I'm not going to be, oh, actually, I should show you the rest of the paintings, and I'm going to take you back to the music. Why I started to mask these figures, these women, these African-American soloists, these women who are vulnerable and alone on the stage, who have been designed in a particular way in order to sell themselves, to sell their music. And most of the time, their album covers are designed by white men. Or teams that, so I ended up making this painting where I have protected her by giving her that ballet mask. And I have written around her all the titles of the songs. This was the first African Diva painting that I made. And the background is cold wax that I etch into the cold wax when it's wet, the titles. And that is because when I first heard music come out of that black vinyl, those grooves, I thought that this was magic. We have changed so much how we listen to music. I mean, the ritual of taking it out of the cover, of course the cover is very important, and you clean it, and you put it down, and you put the needle to the right spot, or you actually listen to the whole thing, never. You know, and it's gone. It's gone. And then you sit there and you read the album cover. And you commune with these people that are singing to you. And it isn't Mrs. Franklin or Miss Summer. It's Aretha. It's Donna. It's Mariah. I mean, we're close. Yeah, and that is where the etching in the background came from. And I'll show you a close-up of it there so you can see what it looks like. This was the front of the cover. This was the second painting that I did, and when I started doing them in a square format. But I do have just a little piece of music for you, because, you know, time's up. Time's up. If I can find it, if I can find that little piece of music, because I want you to listen to this. Turn my brown body white. Come on, dim all the lights. Man, we're so busy watching that disco ball that we're not listening to what Donna had to say. Because if you dim all the lights, you can turn my brown body white. Oh, yeah. I started listening, even though people make fun of it. It's like, you know, last dance. I mean, you know, that's like the whole lyric. It's been a ball talking to you. Thank you very much. Invite me back, I'll come.